The rain sounded like needles hitting the glass roof of the interstate bus terminal. I only intended to do a simple kindness by paying the $4 the old man lacked for his fare. But he did not thank me. Instead, he leaned in close, smelling of stale tobacco and cold metal, and whispered a warning that chilled my spine. When Seth Horton leaves for his business trip, do not use the lipstick he hid in your coat pocket. My name is Chloe Allen, and I am 32 years old. If you had asked me 10 minutes before the incident what my biggest concern was, I would have told you it was the damp cold seeping through the soles of my boots, or the possibility that the storm battering the shores of Lake Erie would turn my 3-hour delay into an overnight stay on a plastic bench. I was standing in the middle of the interstate bus terminal in Cleveland, Ohio, a place that smells permanently of diesel fumes, floor wax, and the quiet desperation of people who have nowhere else to be. The rain was not just falling outside, it felt like it was assaulting the building. It sounded like thousands of needles were being driven into the glass roof. A relentless, drumming static that made it hard to think. I am a rational woman. I work in risk assessment. My entire career is built on the premise that if you look closely enough at the data, if you analyze the patterns of human behavior and structural integrity, you can predict disaster before it happens. I take pride in seeing the cracks in the foundation that others miss, but standing there in that terminal, surrounded by the blur of wet coats and the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, I did not see this coming. I did not calculate the probability of a stranger tearing my life apart with a single sentence. The terminal was crowded, a shifting sea of bodies pressing against the boundaries of personal space. The air was thick with the scent of wet wool and cheap fast food grease. I checked the departure board for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The red letters spelling out delayed mocked me. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, shifting my weight, trying to find a comfortable posture that did not exist. I just wanted to get home. I wanted the sterile, curated comfort of my living room. I wanted to see Seth, my husband, who I assumed was currently packing for his business trip, folding his shirts with that military precision he applied to everything. That was when I noticed the commotion at the front of the line. The line for the ticket counter was not long, but it had stopped moving. A collective sigh rippled through the people standing behind me, the universal sound of American impatience. I leaned to the side, peering past the bulky parka of the man in front of me, and saw him. He was an old man, shrinking inside a trench coat that looked 2 sizes too big and 30 years out of style. The fabric was stained a deep, muddy brown, and the collar was turned up against a draft that only he seemed to feel. He was trembling. It was not a violent shake, but a low-frequency vibration that traveled from his hands to his shoulders. He was digging through a battered leather wallet, his fingers fumbling with receipts and scraps of paper, searching for currency that clearly was not there. The ticket agent, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that hung crookedly on her uniform, sighed loudly. She tapped her acrylic nails against the counter, a staccato rhythm of annoyance. "Sir," she said, her voice flattened by the bulletproof glass partition. "I told you, it is $28. You have 24. The old man muttered something I could not hear. He pulled out a few coins. Dropping a quarter that rolled across the linoleum floor, no one moved to pick it up. The people in line shifted their weight, checking their watches, scrolling through their phones. They looked at the ceiling. They looked at their shoes. They did everything possible to avoid looking at the poverty and confusion standing right in front of them. It is a specific skill we have developed in cities, the ability to render the suffering of others invisible because acknowledging it requires an energy we simply do not have. He looked around, his eyes wide and watery. He looked like a trapped animal. There was a desperation in his posture that twisted something in my chest. I was tired. I was cold. I just wanted the line to move. But more than that, I did not want to watch a human being humiliated over $4. I did not want to carry the memory of his shaking hands home with me. I stepped out of line. The movement was almost involuntary, a reflex born of a desire to fix a small error in the system. I walked up to the counter, the sound of my heels clicking sharply on the hard floor. "I have got it," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill. I did not have singles. I did not care about the change. I slid the money under the partition toward the agent. "Just give him the ticket," I said. The agent looked at me, then at the money, then back at the old man. She shrugged, a gesture that said, "Not my problem anymore," and punched the keys on her register. The printer whirred. Spitting out the ticket, she slid it across the counter along with my change. But I waved it away. "Keep it," I said. I turned to the old man. I expected a nod. Maybe a mumbled thank you. Maybe he would cry. And I would have to awkwardly pat his arm and walk away fast. I was ready for gratitude. I was ready for shame. I was not ready for what happened. The old man did not take the ticket immediately. He turned his head slowly, locking his eyes onto mine. They were not the watery, senile eyes I had imagined from a distance. They were sharp, lucid, terrifyingly alert. They were the eyes of a man who had seen something burning and had barely escaped the flames. There was a recognition in them that made my stomach drop. The way you feel when you miss a step on a staircase in the dark. It was a look that said, "I know you. I know the things you think are hidden." He took a step toward me, then another. He moved with a sudden, fluid speed that contradicted his trembling hands. "Sir, you have your ticket," I said, taking a reflexive step back. He ignored me. He closed the distance between us until he was uncomfortably close, invading my personal space in a way that set off every alarm bell in my nervous system. I could smell him now. It was a thick, suffocating scent, stale tobacco smoke that had settled into the fibers of his coat years ago. The damp, moldy smell of old rain, and underneath it all, a sharp, metallic tang like copper, or dried blood, or the air inside a machine shop. I held my breath. The noise of the station seemed to fade into a dull roar. The way sound warps when you're underwater, it was just me and him. He leaned in. His face was inches from my ear. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, a feverish warmth in the drafty terminal. I wanted to shove him away. I wanted to scream, but my body was frozen, locked in that primal paralysis of predator and prey. He did not say thank you. His lips moved, dry and cracked, and his voice was a rasping whisper, scratching against the air like sandpaper. "When Seth Horton leaves for his business trip," he said, and the syllables of my husband's name hit me like physical blows. "Do not use the lipstick he hid in your coat pocket." The world stopped. For a second, my brain refused to process the sentence. It was a collection of words that did not belong together. Seth Horton, my husband, lipstick, a pocket, warning. I stared at him, my mouth opening slightly, but no sound came out. How did he know Seth? How did he know his full name? I had not spoken to anyone in this station. I was wearing no identification. I was just a nameless commuter in a sea of strangers. Seth was a marketing executive. He wore expensive suits. He had a smile that charmed investors and a voice that calmed storms. He did not belong in the mouth of a disheveled stranger in a bus terminal in Cleveland. "What?" I managed to choke out, the word barely a breath. The old man did not repeat himself. He did not explain. The moment the words left his mouth, the intensity vanished from his face, replaced instantly by the vacant, shuffling demeanor of a confused senior citizen. It was like watching a mask slide back into place. He snatched the ticket from the counter and turned away from me. He moved fast, shuffling toward the boarding gate where the driver was just beginning to load passengers. "Wait," I called out, my voice shrill. "Wait, who are you?" He did not look back. He merged into the line of passengers, a gray shadow disappearing into a gray crowd. I watched him hand his ticket to the driver. I watched him step up onto the bus. I watched him vanish into the dark interior of the vehicle without a single backward glance. He was gone, just like that, like a ghost that had materialized solely to deliver a curse. I stood there, rooted to the spot near the ticket counter. The people in line behind me were moving up, flowing around me like water around a stone, grumbling about me blocking the way. Seth Horton. The name echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my skull. It was impossible. It was a trick, a con. But what was the con I had paid for his ticket? He had asked for nothing else. He had given me nothing but a sentence. Do not use the lipstick. My hand twitched at my side. I was wearing my heavy winter trench coat, the charcoal wool one I wore for client meetings. It had deep pockets. I used them for my phone, my gloves, my keys. I knew what was in my pockets. I had packed them myself this morning before leaving the hotel. But the old man's voice had been so certain, so specific. Hid. He said Seth hid it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the draft swept over me. It started at the base of my neck and spread down my arms, making my fingers numb. I thought of Seth 2 nights ago. He had been unusually attentive, hovering around the entryway while I packed. He had been affectionate, hugging me from behind, his hands sliding into my coat pockets to warm them up. Just checking you have everything. Babe, he had said, stay warm. It was a sweet memory, a normal memory, but now, filtered through the rasping whisper of a stranger, it twisted into something grotesque. I looked down at my coat. The right pocket felt heavy. Not heavy like a phone or a set of keys. It was a subtle weight, something small and dense that had not been there when I left for Cleveland 2 days ago. Or maybe it had, and I had simply not reached deep enough to find it. I wanted to reach in. I wanted to verify it. I wanted to pull the fabric inside out and prove the old man was crazy. That he was just a mentally ill drifter who had guessed a lucky name or overheard a phone call I did not remember making. But I could not move my hand. I was paralyzed by a terrifying possibility. If I reached into my pocket and found nothing, the old man was crazy. But if I reached into my pocket and found a lipstick, the noise of the station came rushing back, the announcements, the crying babies, the rain hammering the roof. But I felt completely isolated. Standing alone in the center of the frame, my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made me feel lightheaded. I have never been a woman who believes in omens. I deal in facts. I deal in verifiable data. But standing there, watching the taillights of the bus fade into the rainy night, I realized that the data of my life had just been corrupted. I did not check the pocket. Not yet. I was too afraid of the answer. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of a mugger or a thief hiding in the shadows of the city. I stood there, shivering under the fluorescent lights, and realized with a dawn of horror that I was terrified of a gift from my husband. The echo of the old man's raspy voice was still bouncing around the hollows of my skull, but my mind was already being pulled backward, dragged against its will to the living room of our apartment just 48 hours earlier. Standing there in the freezing bus terminal, staring at the dirty floor tiles, I felt the memory wash over me with the clarity of a high-definition film. It was the moment I should have seen the trap, but instead, I had walked right into it with a smile on my face. It was Tuesday night. The rain had been lighter then, a gentle tapping against the windows of our 4th-floor apartment rather than the deluge hammering the bus station roof now. Seth had come home late. This was not unusual for him. He is 35 years old, a man in the prime of his career, a marketing director who treats his job with the reverence most people reserve for religion. Usually, when he comes home past 9 o'clock, he is exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes dull with the fatigue of corporate warfare. But 2 days ago, he was different. I heard the key turn in the lock, and then the door swung open with a burst of energy. Seth walked in looking electric. He was wearing his navy suit, the one he saves for board meetings and investor pitches, and he was not slumped over. He was upright, vibrant, vibrating with a kind of manic enthusiasm that I mistook for happiness. He was carrying a box. It was not a cardboard shipping box or a grocery bag. It was a sleek, matte black cube tied with a thick silver ribbon. It looked expensive. It looked important. He placed it on the kitchen island with a deliberate, theatrical motion, like a magician presenting the final reveal of a trick. I was sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of herbal tea and going over a case file for work. I work for Northbridge Risk Solutions. My job is to look at contracts, insurance policies, and corporate mergers, and find the tiny microscopic fractures that could eventually cause the whole structure to collapse. I am paid to be paranoid. I am paid to doubt. But when your husband walks in with a gift and a smile that reaches his eyes, you want to turn that part of your brain off. You want to be a wife, not a risk assessor. Seth came around the counter and kissed me. It was a good kiss, firm and lingering, but there was something performative about it. It felt less like affection and more like punctuation. A comma before the sentence he really wanted to say. He told me he had something for me. He said it was a prototype, a breakthrough. He explained that his company was launching a new line of high-end cosmetics, something revolutionary that would change the market. They were bypassing the usual celebrity endorsements for the initial soft launch. They wanted authenticity. They wanted real women. He told me that he had pulled strings, argued with the product development team, and secured a sample from the very first batch just for me. He wanted me to be the face of their internal live stream launch while he was away on his business trip. I remember looking at him, really looking at him. Seth is a handsome man. He has a jawline that photographs well and eyes that can sell you a vision of a future you did not know you wanted. But in the last 6 months, the architecture of our marriage had shifted. It was subtle, like the settling of a house foundation. He had become guarded. His phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now always in his pocket or placed face down on the nightstand when he received notifications. The screen did not light up anymore. He had disabled the previews. I had caught him on the balcony late at night, whispering into the receiver, his posture tense. When I asked who it was, he would smile that dazzling smile and say it was just work, just a crisis with the supply chain, just the Tokyo office needing guidance. He became sweeter, too, but it was a calculated sweetness. He would buy me flowers on a Tuesday for no reason, but the card would be signed with a generic message. He would suggest expensive dinners, but spend the whole meal checking his watch. It felt like he was managing me, handling me like a client he needed to keep happy until the contract expired. 2 days ago, standing in our kitchen, I felt that prickle of unease again. He pushed the black box toward me. He told me that I needed to use it on Friday night. That was the specific instruction. Friday night at 8 o'clock, he said. He would be in Chicago for the conference, but he would be watching the stream. He wanted me to apply it live on camera for his team. He said it would mean everything to him. I hesitated. The request felt odd. I am not an influencer. I am not a model. I am a woman who reads fine print for a living. I asked him why he needed me to do it. I asked him why they did not hire a professional. I asked him why the timing had to be so precise. That was when the mask slipped, just a fraction of an inch. Seth sighed, a sound that was designed to convey disappointment. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. He looked at me with a wounded expression. He told me that I was doing it again. He said that I was always analyzing, always dissecting, always looking for the trapdoor. He asked me if I trusted him. He asked me if I supported his career or if I just tolerated it. It was a masterclass in guilt. He took my professional caution, the very thing that paid half our mortgage, and twisted it into a personal failing. He made me feel small for asking a question. He made me feel like a bad wife for wondering why I had to put on lipstick for a camera while he was 500 miles away. So, I apologized. I told him I was just tired. I told him I was proud of him. I reached out and untied the silver ribbon. The paper fell away, revealing a velvet-lined interior. Sitting in the center, nestled like a bullet in a gun case, was the lipstick. It was heavy. That was the first thing I noticed. The casing was not plastic. It was a cold, brushed metal that absorbed the heat from my fingers immediately. It was silver, with no branding, no logo, no list of ingredients. It looked industrial. It looked severe. I uncapped it. The color was a deep, rich crimson. It was beautiful in a dangerous way, the color of fresh arterial blood. I raised it to my nose to smell it, expecting the usual scent of vanilla or rose or wax that accompanies high-end cosmetics. There was no floral note. There was no sweetness. It smelled faint, but distinct. It smelled like a doctor's office after it had been scrubbed down. It smelled of antiseptic and ozone. It was a chemical smell, sharp and sterile, the kind of scent that belongs in a laboratory, not on a vanity table. I frowned and looked up at Seth. I started to say that it smelled strange. Before I could finish the sentence, Seth moved. He closed the distance between us and cupped my face in his hands. He kissed me again, and this time it was intense, overpowering. He kissed me long enough to make me forget the smell, long enough to make me breathless. It was a distracting maneuver, I knew that, even as it was happening. He was overwhelming my senses to stop my brain from working. When he pulled back, he did not smile. He looked at me with an intensity that bordered on desperation. He asked me if I would do it. He did not ask it like a question. He asked it like a confirmation of a contract. He told me to put it in my coat pocket right then and there so I would not forget it. He told me to keep it on me. He said he wanted to know it was close to me. I remember laughing nervously. I remember thinking he was being dramatic. But I did it. I put the metal tube into the deep pocket of my wool coat. The same coat I was wearing now. Back in the bus terminal. The memory shattered as a gust of wind slammed against the automatic doors, letting in a swirl of rain and exhaust fumes. I was alone again. The old man was gone. The crowd was shuffling forward. My hand was trembling as I lowered it to my side. I did not want to check. I wanted to believe that the pocket was empty. I wanted to believe that I had left the lipstick on the dresser, or that Seth had taken it back, or that I had imagined the whole bizarre interaction with the stranger. But I work in risk. I deal in facts. And the fact was, I had to know. I slid my hand into the right pocket of my trench coat. The fabric was rough against my cold fingertips. I pushed past a crumpled receipt and a pack of tissues. Then, my fingers brushed against it. It was there. The metal was freezing cold. Colder than the air in the station. It felt heavy, dense, and utterly alien. My fingers curled around the cylinder, recognizing the shape instantly. It was the prototype, the gift, the favor I was supposed to do for my husband to prove that I loved him. I squeezed it tight, my knuckles turning white inside the pocket. The old man had known. He had known Seth's full name. He had known about the business trip, and he had known exactly where the lipstick was. Hid in your coat pocket. That was what he had said. But Seth hadn't hidden it. I had put it there myself, or so I thought. A sudden, sickening realization hit me. I had put it in my pocket 2 days ago, but I had changed coats yesterday. I had worn my puffer jacket to run errands. I had transferred my keys and my wallet, but I had left the lipstick in this wool coat, hanging in the closet. I had not checked to see if it was still there before I left for the trip today. I had just assumed. But the old man had used the word hid. If I had moved it, or if I had taken it out, how would the old man know it was there right now, unless he knew Seth? Unless he knew that Seth had checked? Unless he knew that Seth had ensured the object was on my person before I walked out the door? The metal tube felt like it was burning my hand with its coldness. I let go of it as if it were radioactive, pulling my hand out of the pocket and clutching it to my chest. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm. This was not a cosmetic. You do not warn a stranger in a bus station about a cosmetic. You do not refuse to say thank you and whisper a death threat about a beauty product. I looked around the station, my eyes darting from face to face. Was someone watching me? Was the old man still here? Was Seth watching me? No. Seth was on a plane to Chicago, or at least, that was what the itinerary said. I felt a wave of nausea, the sweetness of the last 2 days, the guilt trip, the calculated kisses. It all rearranged itself in my mind. It wasn't a rough patch in a marriage. It was a setup. I was standing in the middle of a crowd, but I had never felt more exposed. I needed to get out of the open. I needed to see what this thing really was. But I couldn't open it here. I couldn't risk it. I gripped the strap of my bag, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I had to get home, but I couldn't go home to be a victim. I had to go home to find out what my husband had actually given me. And for the first time since I met Seth Horton 7 years ago, I realized that the man I slept next to might be capable of something far worse than infidelity. I looked at the departure board. My bus was boarding. I had a ticket to a home that suddenly felt like a crime scene. I stepped forward, my hand hovering over the pocket that held the silver tube, guarding it not like a treasure, but like evidence. The silence of my apartment felt different than it had 2 days ago. It was usually a sanctuary, a place of curated comfort with its beige walls and oversized windows overlooking the rainy streets of Cleveland. But as I locked the door behind me, engaging the deadbolt and the security chain with trembling fingers, the space felt less like a home and more like a sterile observation tank. The air was stale. The hum of the refrigerator sounded aggressive. I did not take off my coat immediately. I stood in the foyer, my back pressed against the wood of the door, listening to the pounding of my own heart in my ears. It was a frantic, wet thudding that drowned out the distant sirens of the city. I moved into the living room, not turning on the main lights. I relied on the ambient glow from the street lamps outside to guide me. I felt like an intruder in my own life. My hand was still clutched around the object in my pocket, that cold metal cylinder that Seth had called a gift. I needed to see it. I needed to understand what I was holding. But the thought of uncapping it again made my stomach lurch. The old man's voice was a loop in my head, a rasping recording playing over and over. Do not use it. I went into the bathroom, the one attached to the master bedroom. It was a pristine space of white marble and chrome, the kind of bathroom Seth insisted on having because it looked good when guests asked for a tour. I placed the lipstick on the vanity counter. It sat there, innocent and sleek, a silver bullet against the pale stone. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes wide and dark with exhaustion. I looked like a woman on the verge of a breakdown, but I am a risk assessor. I do not break down until the data is finalized. I needed a test. I could not put this substance on my skin. That was the one variable I had already eliminated. If the old man was crazy, I would have ruined a perfectly good lipstick and insulted my husband. If he was right, I would be saving my own face. I opened the drawers under the sink. Rummaging through old linens and toiletries, I found what I was looking for tucked in the back, inside a forgotten box of sentimental clutter. It was a silk handkerchief, a delicate square of white fabric that had been a wedding favor from a cousin 5 years ago. It was pure silk, fragile and organic, similar enough to the texture of human skin in its absorbency. I laid it out on the counter, smoothing the wrinkles with a shaking hand. Then, I went to the vase of white lilies sitting on the nightstand in the bedroom. I pulled one stem out, water dripping onto the carpet, and brought it into the bathroom. I placed the flower next to the handkerchief. I took a breath that rattled in my chest. I picked up the lipstick. The cap slid off with a smooth, magnetic click. The sound was satisfying in a way that felt obscene. I twisted the base. The red stick rose from the casing, gleaming under the vanity lights. It was a perfect, deep crimson. It looked like the kind of red that promises confidence and power. It looked like every other lipstick I had ever owned. I leaned in closer, my nose wrinkling. The smell was there again. In the open air of the bus station. I had barely registered it, but here in the enclosed space of the bathroom, it was distinct. It was not the smell of wax or perfume. It was sharper. It smelled like bleach masked by something sweet, a chemical deception. I held the tube like a weapon, gently, with the precision of a surgeon. I swiped the lipstick across the center of the white silk handkerchief. The color transferred beautifully. It was rich and opaque, a slash of violent red against the white, but the texture was wrong. It did not glide like cream. It dragged slightly, leaving a residue that looked tacky, like a layer of thin glue. It sat on top of the fabric rather than blending into it. I did the same to the petal of the white lily. I painted the delicate surface with the red substance. Then, I waited. I checked the timer on my phone. 1 minute, 2 minutes. At first, nothing happened. The red stripe just sat there, glistening. I began to feel a creeping sense of foolishness. I was a grown woman standing in her bathroom at 11 o'clock at night, conducting science experiments because a homeless man had scared me. I was about to wipe it off, to laugh at my own paranoia, to call Seth and apologize for being insane. Then, the smell changed. It started as a thin wisp of odor, like hair singeing on a curling iron. I leaned closer to the handkerchief. The red stripe was no longer glistening. It was bubbling. I watched in horror as the fabric began to react. The silk, which had been smooth and white, was puckering around the edges of the lipstick mark. The red color was darkening, turning from crimson to the color of dried, oxygenated blood, and then to a sickly black. A tiny wisp of smoke, barely visible, curled up from the cloth. I gasped and stepped back, hitting my hip against the doorframe. The chemical smell intensified, filling the small room with a biting, acrid stench that stung my eyes. It smelled like burning plastic and rotting fruit. I looked at the flower. The petal I had painted was curling inward, shriveling as if it had been touched by a flame. The white structure of the plant was collapsing, turning into a brown, mushy sludge where the cosmetic had touched it. It was not just dying, it was dissolving. The handkerchief was worse. The center where I had applied the thickest layer had disintegrated completely. There was now a hole in the silk, surrounded by a ring of charred, blackened threads. The substance had eaten through the fabric in less than 4 minutes. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. I stared at the counter, my mind racing to process the physics of what I was seeing. If that had been my mouth, if I had pressed that against my lips, I imagined the skin of my lips blistering, peeling away, the chemicals seeping into the soft tissue of my gums, my tongue. I imagined the burning, the swelling that would close my throat. This was not an allergic reaction. This was a corrosive agent. This was acid dressed up in a silver tube. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. The room was spinning. I needed air. I rushed to the bathroom window and threw it open, letting the cold, wet wind blast into the room to clear the toxic fumes. I took deep gulps of the night air, trying to purge the smell from my nose, but the scent of betrayal was thicker than the chemical smoke. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. It felt like a trapped bird battering against my ribcage. I thought of the old man's eyes. They hadn't been crazy. They had been terrified. He knew. He had seen this before. Do not use the lipstick. He had saved me from a mutilation that Seth had wrapped in a silver ribbon. Buzz. The sound of my phone vibrating on the marble counter was as loud as a gunshot. I jumped, my whole body jerking in a spasm of fear. I stared at the screen. It was lit up, displaying a text message. Seth, I did not want to touch the phone. I looked at it as if it were a bomb detonator. But I knew I had to look. I had to know the script he was playing. I picked it up with 2 fingers. The message was short. It was devoid of emojis. It was devoid of affection. Did you use it? I need to know. The timestamp was from 10 seconds ago. He was not asleep. He was not at a dinner. He was waiting. A chill that had nothing to do with the open window froze my blood. He wasn't asking if I liked the color. He wasn't asking if it smelled good. He asked if I had used it. He needed confirmation that the process had begun. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I could not tell him the truth. If I told him I knew, the game would change. I did not know what he would do. I did not know who else was watching. I was alone in the apartment. I typed, my fingers clumsy and stiff. Almost. Just doing my foundation first. It looks intense. I hit send. I prayed it sounded casual. I prayed it sounded like the wife he thought he controlled. The response was immediate. The phone did not just buzz. It began to ring. The screen filled with his face. A video call. Panic, sharp and cold, spiked in my chest. He wanted to see. He did not trust the text. He wanted to see my face. He wanted to see the lipstick on my mouth. Or maybe he wanted to witness the moment it happened. I stared at the ringing phone. If I answered, he would see the fear in my eyes. He would see that my lips were bare. He would see the smoke clearing from the bathroom. I let it ring for 3 seconds. 4, 5. I hit the decline button. I typed again, forcing my brain to formulate a lie that would buy me time. Can't answer video right now. In the bathroom and not decent. Signal is bad in here too. We'll send a pic when I'm done. Promise. I sent it. I felt a wave of nausea. I had lied to clients about deadlines. I had lied to insurance adjusters about risk variables. But I had never lied to Seth about where I was or what I was doing. It felt like crossing a border into a foreign country where the laws I knew did not apply. Seth's reply came a moment later. Okay. Hurry. I want to see you shine. The word shine made me want to vomit. He didn't want me to shine. He wanted me to burn. I put the phone down and looked back at the carnage on the counter. The flower was dead. The handkerchief was ruined. The evidence was undeniable. I could not leave this here. I had to secure it. I went to the kitchen and found a heavy-duty freezer bag, the kind with the double-locking zipper. I went back to the bathroom, using a pair of tweezers. I picked up the lipstick tube. I dropped it into the bag. Then I put that bag inside another bag. I went to the utility closet and found an old metal cash box I used to keep spare change in for laundry. I dumped the coins out onto the floor, not caring where they rolled. I placed the double-bagged lipstick inside the metal box and locked it with a small key. I felt like I was containing a radioactive isotope. I felt like if I wasn't careful, it would explode and take the whole building down. I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching the cold metal box. I needed to think. I needed to understand the mechanics of this. Why? Why would he do this? I held the box up to the light coming from the hallway. I could see the outline of the lipstick through the plastic bags inside. I remembered something. When I had twisted the base to raise the lipstick, I had seen a glint of something on the bottom of the tube. I unlocked the box. I carefully lifted the bag out, making sure not to touch the tube itself. I turned the bag over, peering through the plastic at the bottom sticker of the lipstick casing. Usually, there is a name: Ruby Red, Midnight Passion, Scarlet Letter, or a batch code like A24. There was no name. Instead, etched directly into the silver metal in a font so small I had to squint to read it, was a string of characters: EXP-C-774-NF. It was not a commercial code. It was not a shade name. EXP, experimental, NF. Not for what, not for sale, not for human use. It was an inventory tag, a lab specimen ID. Seth hadn't pulled strings to get me a prototype from the marketing team. He had pulled something from a hazardous materials inventory. He hadn't given me a gift. He had assigned me a number. I put the bag back in the box and locked it again. The click of the lock sounded like the closing of a prison cell. I sat there in the dark, the smell of burnt silk still lingering in the air, and realized that the man I had married was not just a liar. He was an architect of my destruction, and he was waiting for a picture. I did not reply to Seth. I could not. The phone sat on the passenger seat of my car like a live grenade, the screen dark, but the threat palpable. I had left my apartment 17 minutes after locking the lipstick in the cash box. I could not stay there. The air in the apartment felt contaminated, and the silence was too loud. I needed to move. I needed to turn this nightmare into a process, a series of solvable logistical problems, because that was the only way I knew how to function. I was driving north on the interstate, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the relentless Ohio storm. The city was a blur of smeared red taillights and black asphalt. I had one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting on the metal box on the seat next to me. I needed a professional. I needed a scientist who operated in the gray areas of the law. Someone who would not call the police the moment they saw a corrosive substance disguised as a beauty product. I pressed the speed dial for Megan Price. Megan has been my best friend since college. She is an emergency room nurse who has seen everything from gunshot wounds to botched home surgeries. She has a contact list that would make a defense attorney jealous. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened instantly when she heard the tone of my voice. Chloe, what is wrong? It is 1 a.m. I need a name. Megan, I said. keeping my eyes on the wet road. I need someone who can analyze a chemical sample. Tonight, right now, someone discreet. No police, no paper trail that leads back to me until I say so. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the rustle of sheets as she sat up. Megan did not ask why. That is why I love her. She knows that in my line of work, questions can be liabilities. Is it drugs? She asked. No, I said. It is worse. It is something Seth gave me. The silence stretched for a beat longer this time. Megan never liked Seth. She always said he was too polished, like a piece of fruit that had been waxed to hide a bruise. Write this down, she said. Dr. Nolan Mercer. He runs a private materials lab out in Solon. He does consulting for industrial insurance claims, but he takes freelance work if you pay in cash. He owes me a favor for a patient I kept off the official logs last year. I will text him now. Go. She gave me the address. I hung up without saying goodbye. I did not have the emotional bandwidth for pleasantries. The drive to the suburbs took 40 minutes. The industrial park where Dr. Mercer's lab was located was a ghost town of concrete warehouses and chain-link fences. It was the kind of place where bad things happen in movies, desolate and bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium vapor lights. I pulled up to a low, brick building with a sign that read, Mercer Analytical Solutions. There was a single car in the lot, a modest sedan. I parked next to it and killed the engine. The rain drummed on the roof of my car, a rhythmic reminder of the bus station. I grabbed the metal box and ran for the door. Dr. Nolan Mercer was waiting for me. He was a man in his 50s, wearing a wrinkled lab coat over a t-shirt and jeans. He looked like a man who lived on caffeine and curiosity. He unlocked the glass door and ushered me in, locking it immediately behind me. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Megan said it was urgent, he said, his voice rough. He did not smile. He looked at the metal box in my hands. Is that it? Yes, I said. I need to know what it is. I need to know what it does to human skin, and I need a full toxicology report. He nodded and led me back to the main lab. It was a stark, white room filled with expensive-looking equipment spectrometers, microscopes, fume hoods. It was a world of pure fact, and I felt my shoulders relax slightly. Here, emotions did not matter. Only molecular structures mattered. I set the box on a stainless steel table and unlocked it. I put on a pair of latex gloves he offered me, then carefully lifted out the double-bagged tube. Doctor. Mercer leaned in, adjusting his glasses. He took the bag from me. He did not open it immediately. He held it up to the light, inspecting the silver casing. No branding, he muttered. Custom casing, heavy. He walked over to a fume hood, a glass-enclosed workspace with an exhaust fan. He turned on the ventilation system, which roared to life with a low hum. Only then did he unzip the plastic bag. The smell hit him instantly, even from 3 feet away. I saw his nose twitch. Organic solvents, he said, his voice tight. And something else. Sulfur no. Something more acidic. He used a pair of long forceps to remove the lipstick from the bag. He twisted the base. The red stick rose up, looking deceptively perfect under the harsh laboratory lights. Doctor. Mercer scraped a tiny sample onto a glass slide. He moved with practiced efficiency, but I noticed his movements were sharp, wary. He walked over to a large machine that looked like a printer hooked up to a computer. Mass spectrometry, he said, answering the question I hadn't asked. It will break down the chemical composition. Give me 10 minutes for the preliminary scan. We stood in silence while the machine whirred. I watched the screen, watching lines spike and dip on a graph I did not understand. You said your husband gave you this, Mercer asked, his eyes glued to the monitor. Yes, I said. He wanted me to wear it for a live stream. Mercer turned to look at me. His expression was grave. You are lucky you have good instincts, Mrs. Allen. If you had put this on your lips, we would not be meeting here. We would be meeting in a burn unit or a morgue. My stomach turned over. What is it? I am seeing high concentrations of a caustic agent, he said, pointing to a red spike on the screen. It is masked with lipids and wax to look like lipstick, but the active ingredient is a corrosive compound usually used in industrial stripping, but it is modified. It is designed to be time-released. It reacts with the moisture and heat of the skin. It would not burn immediately. It would take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to activate fully. By then, it would have seeped into the dermis. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. This is not a mistake. This is a weapon. It is designed to disfigure. I felt the blood drain from my face. Disfigure, not kill. Disfigure. Seth didn't want me dead. He wanted me ruined. He wanted to take my face, my identity, my ability to walk into a room and command respect, and burn it away. How bad? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Permanent scarring, Mercer said bluntly. Severe tissue necrosis. If you swallowed any well. Let us not speculate. I will run the full panel. It will take 2 days to get the certified results you can use in court, but I can give you a preliminary report tonight. Do it, I said. Keep the sample. Lock it up. Do not let anyone near it. I have a safe, he said. This stays between us until you say otherwise. I paid him in cash, a thick envelope I had pulled from my emergency stash at home. I left the lab feeling hollowed out. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a chemical reality printed on a piece of paper folded in my pocket. I walked out into the parking lot. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, a fine mist that coated everything in a glistening sheen. The industrial park was silent. I walked toward my car. My keys clenched in my hand between my knuckles, a habit I had learned in college for self-defense. I felt eyes on me. It is a sensation every woman knows. The prickle on the back of the neck. The sudden awareness of the negative space around you. I stopped and looked around. The parking lot was empty, save for my car and Mercer's sedan, but then I saw the security booth near the gate. It was a small, illuminated box in the darkness. Inside, a figure was sitting, hunched over a steaming mug. He was wearing a dark blue security uniform and a cap pulled low over his forehead. I froze. There was something familiar about the slope of his shoulders, the way he held the cup with both hands, as if trying to extract every ounce of warmth from it. As if sensing my gaze, the guard looked up. The light from the booth illuminated his face, the deep lines etched around his mouth, the gray stubble, the eyes that had looked at me with such terrifying urgency in the bus terminal. It was him. My breath caught in my throat. I stood paralyzed in the rain. It was impossible. He was a homeless man. He was a drifter. He had been wearing a dirty trench coat and begging for ticket money. Now he was wearing a uniform with a badge that caught the light. He saw me. He did not look surprised. He did not look away. He stood up slowly, placing his coffee cup on the desk. He opened the door of the booth and stepped out into the mist. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a gesture to summon me. He pointed to a spot behind the booth, away from the direct line of sight of the security cameras mounted on the gate. I should have run. My risk assessment brain was screaming at me to get in the car and drive, but curiosity is a powerful force, and fear is even stronger. This man knew Seth. He knew the lipstick, and now he was here, guarding the very place where I had brought the evidence. I walked toward him. I kept my distance, staying out of arm's reach. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking slightly. He looked different in the uniform. He looked straighter, less frail. He tapped the plastic nameplate pinned to his chest. Walter Grady. "I am the man who tried to save you $4 and a lot of pain," he said. His voice was the same raspy, smelling of tobacco, but steady. "And you are the woman who didn't listen well enough to stay home. How are you here?" I asked. "Are you following me?" "I work here," Walter said. "Night shift. It is quiet. Gives me time to think." "That is a lie," I said. "You were at the bus station. You were begging." "I was waiting," he corrected. "I knew you were coming through. I knew the storm would delay the buses. I knew Seth's schedule." He stepped closer, and I flinched. He stopped immediately, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. I am not going to hurt you. Mrs. Allen, I have spent the last 3 days trying to make sure you stay intact. He glanced up at the camera mounted on the pole above us, then stepped further into the shadow of the booth. I used to work for them, he said. The words came out heavy, burdened. Them. The logistics company, Walter said. The one that handles the private shipments for the research division Seth uses. Not the company he works for publicly. The other one. The one that doesn't put logos on their boxes. My mind raced. Seth had a network I knew nothing about. I worked the warehouse floor for 5 years, Walter continued. I signed the NDAs. I looked the other way when crates came in labeled hazardous, but went out labeled commercial samples. I know the codes. EXP-C-774. That is the series, isn't it? I stared at him. He knew the code on the bottom of the lipstick. I saw the manifest, Walter said. I saw the package addressed to Seth Horton's personal residence. I saw the contents listed, and I saw the prototype design. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and anger. I know the motif. Mrs. Allen, I have seen what they do. They test on people who can't complain, or people they think they own. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. Walter laughed, a dry, bitter sound. The police, Mrs. Allen. These people buy the police. They buy the silence. I am just a security guard. I am nobody. If I talked, I would just disappear, or I would have an accident. He looked deep into my eyes. But when I saw your name on the label, I saw a picture of you once. Seth showed it to a guy at the loading dock, bragging, said his wife was going to be the face of the future. I didn't know what he meant then, but when I saw that tube, I knew. He leaned in, his voice dropping to that familiar, chilling whisper. I don't want you to die, Chloe, and I don't want you to live the way the others live, broken, hiding in the dark because they are ashamed of their own faces. Others? I asked. There are others. Walter nodded slowly. You are not the first experiment. You are just the first one he married. The rain was falling harder now, soaking my hair, running down my face like cold tears. I looked at Walter Grady, this man who was a ghost in the machine, a watcher in the shadows. He wasn't a random encounter. He was the only leak in a watertight vessel of cruelty. Go home, Walter said. Act normal. Do not let him know you know. If he finds out you didn't use it, he will try again, and next time, it won't be something you can choose to apply. He turned and went back into his booth, closing the door against the rain. He sat down and picked up his coffee, staring straight ahead at the monitors, as if our conversation had never happened. I walked back to my car, my legs feeling like lead. I had the science in my pocket, and now I had the history. I wasn't just fighting a bad marriage, I was fighting a supply chain. The rain was relentless, washing over the windshield of my car in sheets that distorted the world into a smear of gray and black. I had not started the engine yet. I sat there in the driver's seat. The door cracked open just enough to hear Walter Grady's voice over the drumming on the roof. I could not leave, not yet. He had given me a headline, but I needed the article. I needed to understand the precedent. You said there were others, I said, my voice barely carrying over the wind. Tell me. Walter sighed, a sound that seemed to rattle deep in his chest. He leaned against the metal frame of the security booth, ignoring the water soaking into the shoulders of his uniform. He looked like a man who had been carrying a heavy stone for too long and was finally setting it down, even if he knew it might crush his feet. 2 years ago, Walter said, there was a girl. I never knew her real name, only her handle. She was one of those influencers, bright skin, bright eyes, lived her whole life through a ring light. She was the first face Seth brought in for the beta testing phase. He took a sip of his coffee, grimacing as if it had gone cold. It was supposed to be a private shoot, just her, the camera crew, and the product. They were filming content for the rollout. I was working the perimeter security at the warehouse they used for the studio setup. I was not supposed to be inside, but I heard it. Heard what? I asked. The screaming. Walter said, He did not say it dramatically. He stated it like a fact, like a weather report. It wasn't a scared scream. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap. I ran to the loading bay doors. I saw her running out of the studio space, clutching her face. Her hands were covered in something red and black. She was clawing at her own skin, trying to get it off. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. What happened to her? The suits descended, Walter said. Not paramedics, lawyers, 2 men in black coats who were always shadowing Seth back then. They hustled her into a private car before she could even get to the parking lot. I saw them talking to her manager. I saw the manager nodding, looking terrified, but also calculating. Walter spat on the wet pavement. She vanished. Mrs. Allen. Her account went dormant. The official statement was that she had developed a severe, rare autoimmune reaction to a competitor's product she had used previously. They spun it. They said she was taking time off to heal, but I saw the paperwork come through the logistics office a week later. Settlement and non-disclosure agreement. The payout was substantial, enough to buy a house in the hills, or enough to pay for 5 years of reconstructive surgery. I suspect it was the latter. They bought her silence, I whispered. They bought her life, Walter corrected. That is the business model. They do not fix the product. They fix the liability. They calculate the cost of a lawsuit versus the cost of a recall. And if the lawsuit is cheaper, they let people burn. He looked at me, his eyes hard under the brim of his cap. I started paying attention to the shipments after that. I work in the warehouse. I see what comes in and what goes out. You would expect crates of beeswax, pigments, essential oils, normal cosmetic bases, but I saw things that didn't belong. Crates marked with hazard diamonds, industrial solvents, isopropyl agents used for stripping paint from aircraft aluminum. They were being routed to the same lab where Seth was spending his nights. Why? I asked. Why put that in a cosmetic? That is what I couldn't figure out, Walter said. Until I heard him. Heard Seth, Walter nodded. About 6 months ago, he was in the parking lot here, late at night. He was arguing with a woman. I didn't see her face clearly. She stayed in her car, a silver sedan, high-end. She was yelling about timelines, about return on investment. She said the market was saturated. She said, "Pretty doesn't sell anymore. Seth, everyone is pretty." Walter paused, letting the memory crystallize. And Seth, he laughed. He leaned against her car door and said something I wrote down in my logbook because it made no sense at the time. He said, "I don't need pretty. I need a moment. I need a media shock. I need a tragedy that makes the recovery look like a miracle." The air in my car suddenly felt very thin. "A miracle," I repeated. "He wants the damage," Walter said. "He creates the problem so he can sell the solution, or maybe he just needs the attention. The stock market loves a comeback story, but you have to have a fall first. That girl 2 years ago, that was a test run. But it was too private. Nobody saw it happen. He needs an audience." He pointed a finger at me. "That is why he chose you. You are not a model. You are his wife. If it happens to you, on camera. Liv, it is not a product defect. It is a personal tragedy. It is the story of the year. And he is the grieving husband who will dedicate his life to finding the cure." I felt bile rise in my throat. It was so monstrous, so clinically insane, that it had to be true. It fit every data point, the live stream, the specific timing, the guilt he used to manipulate me into agreeing. He didn't just want me to use the lipstick. He wanted the world to watch my face melt. "Go," Walter said, stepping back into the booth. "Before the shift change, if they see you talking to me, we are both dead." I drove. I did not know where I was going. I just let the car eat up the miles of wet asphalt. My phone, which had been sitting silently on the passenger seat, suddenly lit up. It was not Seth. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered it through the car's Bluetooth system. "Mrs. Allen." The voice was clipped, urgent. It was Dr. Mercer. "I am here," I said. I have the preliminary breakdown, Mercer said. He sounded rattled. I could hear the hum of machinery in the background. I told you it was corrosive. I underplayed it. The base compound is a modified alkaline agent. It reacts to the pH of human skin. But here's the kicker: it contains a high concentration of lidocaine. Lidocaine, I asked. A numbing agent. Exactly, Mercer said. That is why it is so dangerous. If you applied this, you wouldn't feel the burn immediately. The lidocaine would mask the pain receptors for the first 3 or 4 minutes. You would keep applying it. You would smile for the camera. By the time you felt the pain, the chemical would have already eaten through the epidermis and into the subcutaneous tissue. The damage would be catastrophic before you even screamed. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands shook. It was designed to ensure I didn't wipe it off. It was designed to ensure the injury was deep. Thank you, doctor, I said. Send the report to the encrypted email I gave you. Do not print it. I hung up. The pieces were locking together like the gears of a trap. Seth wanted a show. He wanted a horror movie broadcast in real time. But there was one piece missing. Seth was a monster. But he was a corporate monster. He was a man of contracts and clauses. He wouldn't risk a lawsuit, even from his wife. If I survived and sued him, he would lose everything. He had to have a shield. I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store. The lights were blindingly bright, casting long shadows across the empty spaces. I grabbed my tablet from my work bag. I needed to see the paperwork. Not his, mine. Seth and I shared a cloud storage account for household administration. We kept tax returns, lease agreements, and insurance policies there. But Seth also had a folder he thought was private. He didn't know that I had guessed his password 3 years ago. It was the date of his first big promotion. Not our anniversary. I logged in. My fingers flew across the glass screen. I bypassed the photos, bypassed the financial spreadsheets. I went into a subfolder nested deep within a directory labeled Archived Projects. There was a new file. It had been created 3 months ago. The file name was innocuous. project_V_release_forms_signed ... I opened it. It was a standard liability waiver, the kind you sign before going skydiving or getting minor surgery, but the language was specific. It detailed the risks of experimental topical treatments. It listed potential side effects: chemical burns, scarring, permanent tissue damage, nerve damage, and at the bottom of the last page, there was a signature. Chloe Allen. I stared at it. It was my signature. The loop of the C. The sharp slant of the A. It was perfect, but I had never seen this document in my life. I zoomed in. The resolution was high. I looked at the pixelation around the ink. It was too smooth. It was a digital stamp. He had lifted my signature from our mortgage documents or our tax returns and pasted it here. I scrolled up to the date. It was dated October 14th. That was the day I had been in the hospital getting my wisdom teeth removed. I had been under anesthesia for half the day. I couldn't have signed anything. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just planning to hurt me. He was planning to blame me, if the live stream went wrong, or rather, when it went exactly as he planned and I was left disfigured. He would pull this document out. He would tell the press, the insurance companies, and the courts that I was a willing participant. He would say I knew the risks. He would say I insisted on being the test subject to support him. He would say it was a tragic accident, but one I had legally consented to. He would walk away with the sympathy of the world, a viral video that launched his brand, and a wife who was too broken and legally bound to fight back. I sat in the cold light of the grocery store parking lot, the tablet glowing in my lap. I looked at my forged signature. It looked so real. It looked like I had signed my own life away. My fear began to curdle. It cooled and hardened into something sharp and heavy in my gut. I wasn't just a victim in a horror story anymore. I was a variable he hadn't accounted for. He thought he was the only one who knew how to read the fine print. But that was my job. I closed the tablet. I didn't delete the file. I made a copy. I sent it to a secure server that Seth didn't know existed. Then I picked up my phone and looked at the black screen. He wanted a media shock. He wanted an event that no one could look away from. "Okay, Seth," I whispered to the empty car. "I will give you a show." I put the car in reverse. I was done running. It was time to start the production. The engine of my car was still running, vibrating beneath me in the empty grocery store parking lot. The rain had finally slowed to a cold, persistent drizzle, but the storm inside my head had shifted. It was no longer a chaotic hurricane of fear and confusion. It had organized itself into a cold, hard front. I looked at the police station address on my GPS, the blue line tempting me to drive there and dump the metal box on a detective's desk, but I did not put the car in gear. I sat there, staring at the forged signature on my tablet, and I let my professional instincts override my survival instinct. If I went to the police now, what would happen? I had a lipstick that contained a corrosive agent. I had a husband who was out of town. I had a security guard with a history of silence who might get cold feet in an interrogation room. And Seth had a document, signed by me, acknowledging that I was a willing participant in an experimental trial. He had the perfect defense. He would look at the officers with those earnest, heartbroken eyes and say, "It was a tragic accident. She knew the risks. We were trying to build a future together. I am devastated." He would not go to prison. He would go to court, settle for a fine, and walk away with his reputation bruised but intact. He would paint me as the reckless wife who pushed for a dangerous beauty treatment. I could not let that happen. I did not just want to survive Seth Horton. I wanted to dismantle him. I wanted to take him apart piece by piece, just as he had planned to do to my face. I turned off the GPS. I did not need the police. I needed a strategy. I picked up my phone and dialed David Ross. David was a contract lawyer I had worked with on a few high-stakes liability cases at Northbridge. He was expensive, he was cynical, and he operated with the kind of aggressive precision that made people nervous. It was 3 a.m. I knew he would be awake. David did his best work when the rest of the world was sleeping. "Chloe?" His voice was gravelly, but alert. "You know my billing rate doubles after midnight. I am not calling for Northbridge," I said. "I am calling for me, and I need you to tell me exactly what constitutes entrapment versus a legal confession in the state of Ohio." There was a pause. I heard the click of a lighter and the exhale of smoke. "Talk to me," David said. I gave him the summary. I stripped away the emotion. I gave him the timeline, the gift, the coercion, the lab results from Mercer, the forged waiver. "The waiver is his shield," David said immediately. "If you sue him now, he produces that. You claim forgery. He claims you signed it digitally. It becomes a battle of experts that drags on for years. By the time you win, if you win, nobody cares anymore." "So how do I kill the shield?" I asked. "You need him to admit it," David said. "You need him to admit, on record, that he knows the damage is not accidental. You need him to admit the intent to harm, and you need him to do it while he thinks he is winning." "Ohio is a one-party consent state," I said. It was a fact I knew from a dozen insurance fraud cases. "Exactly," David replied. "As long as you are part of the conversation, you can record it without his knowledge. But it has to be clear. Chloe, no ambiguity. If he says something went wrong, that is a defense. If he says, 'I made sure it would hurt,' that is a conviction." "I can get that," I said. "Be careful," David warned. "If he realizes you are recording, and if he is as desperate as you say, the legal advice stops and the physical danger begins, do not be a hero. Be a wire." I hung up. The plan was forming. It was a scaffold of steel beams rising in my mind. I started the car and drove. My next stop was not home. It was Megan's apartment. Megan answered the door in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. I had texted her from the car. She took one look at my face, pale, determined, eyes hard, and stepped aside to let me in. "Did you get it?" I asked. Megan nodded. She walked into her living room, where a large black kit was spread open on her coffee table. Megan was not just a nurse. In college, she had paid her tuition by doing special effects makeup for local theater productions. She knew anatomy, and she knew how to fake trauma. I went to the 24-hour supply store, she said, gesturing to the pots of latex, the color wheels of bruising purples and reds, and the bottles of artificial blistering agents. Chloe, are you sure about this? Once I put this on you, it is going to look real. It is going to look horrific. It has to, I said, taking off my coat. Seth needs to believe he succeeded. He needs to see the ruin he paid for. If he has any doubt, he won't talk. He will just play the concerned husband. I need to shock him into arrogance. I sat in the chair she had placed under the brightest lamp in the room. Megan began to work. It was a strange, silent procedure. The smell of liquid latex filled the room. A smell that was oddly similar to the chemical stench of the lipstick. Ammonia and rubber. I closed my eyes. I felt the cold paste being applied to my lower lip, my chin, the corner of my mouth. Megan worked with the focus of a surgeon. She built up layers of artificial skin, then tore them open to simulate ruptured blisters. She used grease paint to create the angry red of chemical inflammation. She added the sheen of weeping wounds using a glycerin gel. It took an hour. When she was done, she handed me a mirror. I looked at myself, and my breath hitched in my throat. The woman in the mirror was destroyed. Her mouth was a mess of raw, peeling flesh. The burns seemed to track down her chin. As if a caustic liquid had dribbled and eaten its way through the skin. It looked painful. It looked permanent. It looked exactly like the fate Walter had described for the other girl. "It is perfect," I whispered, careful not to crack the drying latex. "It is a nightmare," Megan said, her voice trembling. "I hate him. Chloe, I really hate him." "Good," I said. "Hold on to that. I might need you to testify to that later." While the makeup set, I sent a message to Walter. I used a burner number Megan had set up for me. "I am going through with it, tonight, but we are not doing a settlement. We are doing a public execution." Walter's reply came 3 minutes later. "Scorched earth. That is the only way I walk away clean. What do you need from me?" "I need the chain of custody." I typed, "I need you to get me the shipping logs that show the box leaving the warehouse and arriving at our apartment. And I need you to be ready to talk to a journalist." "Name the place," Walter replied. "Elena Vance," I typed. Elena Vance was a freelance investigative reporter who had made a name for herself exposing the non-disclosure agreements that silenced victims of harassment in the tech industry. I had followed her work for years. She was hungry, she was fearless, and she despised bullies. I had already sent her an encrypted email with the subject line "Industrial Sabotage disguised as cosmetics, a live evidence trail." She had replied instantly. She was ready. She would have a photographer on standby near the venue. I had the law. I had the look. I had the media. Now I needed the trap. I opened my tablet again. I needed to know exactly where the endgame would happen. Seth had told me the launch was at the Riverton Grand Hotel. It was a historic venue downtown, full of marble columns and crystal chandeliers. He had said we would get a room there for the night, so we didn't have to drive home late. I logged into his travel account. I found the reservation. He hadn't booked a standard room. He hadn't booked the bridal suite. He had booked the Diplomat's Wing, room 814. I frowned. I knew the Riverton. The Diplomat's Wing was not the most luxurious part of the hotel. It was the most secluded. It was located at the end of a long corridor in the old tower. Separated from the main guest elevators by a set of heavy fire doors, it was famous for being quiet. Soundproof. He hadn't booked it for romance. He had booked it for containment. I looked at the notes on the reservation. VIP service requested private medical kit first aid, extra ice. Do not disturb for 24 hours. My blood ran cold. He had ordered a first aid kit. He knew. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew I would be screaming in pain. He knew I would be begging for a doctor. And he planned to drag me into a soundproof room, apply ice to a chemical burn which doctor, Mercer had told me would only make the tissue damage worse and wait for the swelling to go down, while the waiver he forged protected him from the police. He wasn't just going to hurt me. He was going to torture me and tell me it was for my own good. I felt a tear leak out of my eye, tracking through the fake burn on my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I was done crying. "Megan," I said, standing up, "do you have a small lapel microphone? Something that can hide under a collar?" "I have a recorder I use for lectures," she said. "It is tiny. It holds 12 hours of audio." "Get it," I said. I spent the next hour assembling the dossier. It was a physical package, a weapon made of paper. I took the preliminary report. "Doctor," Mercer had emailed me. I printed it. "Compound analysis. Corrosive alkaline with lidocaine masking agent." I took the forged waiver. I printed it. Circling the digital timestamp that proved I was in surgery when it was signed, I took screenshots of Seth's texts. "Did you use it? I need to know. Hurry. I want to see you shine." I put the sealed sample from the lab, a small secondary vial Mercer had given me, into a padded envelope. I put everything into a leather portfolio. This was my insurance. If anything went wrong, if Seth figured it out and tried to physically stop me, this portfolio was going to Elena Vance. I looked at the clock. It was 6 in the morning. The sun was coming up over Cleveland, a gray, watery light that washed out the colors of the world. The launch event started at 7 in the evening. I had 12 hours to prepare. 12 hours to become the actress of a lifetime. I stood up and looked at Megan. She was holding the recorder, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. "You look like a monster," she said softly. I touched the grotesque, rubbery wound on my face. "No," I said. "I look like the truth. Seth is the monster. I am just the mirror." I took the recorder and taped it to the inside of my dress, right over my heart. I wanted him to hear the beat of it when he hugged me. I wanted the jury to hear how steady it was when I destroyed him. I was ready. Seth Horton wanted a tragedy. I would give him a tragedy. But it wouldn't be mine. The Riverton Grand Hotel is a monument to a version of America that no longer exists, a place of marble columns, velvet drapes, and chandeliers that cost more than most people earn in a decade. Tonight, however, it did not look like history. It looked like a battlefield dressed up in sequins. The ballroom on the ground floor had been transformed into a sleek, hyper-modern arena for the launch of Seth's new cosmetic line. The lighting was not the warm, forgiving yellow of incandescent bulbs. It was a sharp, clinical blue and white, designed to make skin look luminous on camera, but making the air feel cold and sterile. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom, clutching my clutch bag with a grip that turned my knuckles white. Inside that bag was not lipstick or a compact mirror, but a leather portfolio containing the evidence that would end my marriage, taped against my chest, hidden beneath the fabric of my black dress, was the small digital recorder Megan had given me. I could feel it pressing against my skin, a hard, plastic reminder that every word spoken tonight was a bullet I needed to catch. I was wearing a dress I had bought 3 years ago for a funeral. It was simple, black, and covered me from my neck to my wrists. It was the antithesis of the glittering, flesh-bearing gowns that populated the room. But the most jarring part of my ensemble was not the dress. It was the blue surgical mask covering the lower half of my face. In a post-pandemic world, masks were common, but at a high-end beauty launch where the currency was faces, wearing one was an act of aggression. It was a billboard that said, "Something is wrong." I took a deep breath, smelling the latex and grease paint Megan had applied to my chin and mouth under the mask. It itched. It felt heavy and grotesque, a constant physical reminder of the lie I was about to sell. I stepped into the room. The noise hit me first. It was a wall of sound composed of clinking crystal, low-frequency bass from the DJ booth, and the murmur of 200 people trying to impress each other. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. I walked slowly. I did not try to hide. I walked straight down the center aisle of the carpet, moving against the flow of waiters carrying trays of champagne. Heads began to turn. It started as a ripple near the door and spread outward like a wave. I saw a woman in a silver-sequined dress nudge her partner and point. I saw a group of investors in bespoke suits stop their conversation and stare. I saw the phones come up. That was the fuel Seth ran on. Attention, to my left and right. Large vertical screens were displaying the live feed of the event. The comments from the social media stream were scrolling up the side of the display in real time. I glanced at one screen as I passed. Who is the girl in black? Is that the wife? Why is she wearing a mask? Is she sick? This looks weird. Drama incoming. I kept my eyes forward, searching for him. Seth was standing near the main stage, holding a microphone, basking in the adoration of his team. He looked immaculate. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, his hair styled to look effortlessly windswept. He was laughing at something a donor had said, throwing his head back in a display of charming vulnerability. Then he saw me. I watched the recognition hit him, for a fraction of a second. His smile faltered, his eyes narrowed, scanning my face, locking onto the blue mask. I saw the calculation happen in real time. He was not worried about my health. He was checking the timeline. He was wondering if the chemical had worked. He was wondering if the mask was hiding a tragedy he could exploit. He did not run to me. He did not look horrified. He looked relieved. He said something to the people around him, excused himself, and began to walk toward me. He moved with a sense of urgency that looked heroic to the cameras but felt predatory to me, the spotlight operator, sensing the shift in the room's energy, swung the main beam around, catching us both in a pool of blinding white light. I stopped. I lowered my head, shrinking into my shoulders, playing the role of the terrified, wounded bird. Seth reached me. He did not ask permission. He pulled me into an embrace that was tight enough to bruise. He pressed my face into his shoulder, shielding me from the cameras while simultaneously making sure we were the center of the frame. "Chloe," he said. His voice was breathless, loud enough for the boom microphone overhead to pick up. "Oh my God. Chloe." I felt the recorder against my chest vibrate as I leaned into him. "I am here, Seth," I whispered, pitching my voice to sound thin and wavering. He pulled back, keeping his hands firmly on my shoulders, framing me like a prop. He looked at the mask. He looked at my eyes. He put on a face of devastating concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, pitching his voice to carry to the nearby guests. "I told you to be careful with the samples, honey. I told you they were potent." I felt a surge of cold rage. He was doing it. He was planting the seed of negligence before anyone had even seen the wound. "I told you to be careful." He was absolving himself in the preamble. I let my voice trail off. I reached up and touched the edge of the mask with a trembling hand. I think I had a reaction. "It hurts. Seth, it burns." I saw a flash of triumph in his eyes. It was microscopic, gone in an instant. But I saw it. He thought he had won. He thought the acid had done its work. "It is okay," he said soothingly, turning me slightly so the cameras could see his protective posture. "We need to get you somewhere quiet. We need to get this off you." "I just want to leave," I sobbed, forcing tears into my eyes. "Everyone is staring." I know," Seth said. He looked around at the crowd, his expression shifting to one of apologetic strength. "Excuse us, everyone. My wife is not feeling well. Please, enjoy the evening. We just need a moment." He began to guide me toward the side exit. He did not lead me toward the main lobby or the elevators that led to the guest rooms. He steered me toward the service corridor that connected to the diplomat's wing. He was moving fast, too fast. It was the pace of a man who had rehearsed this extraction. He did not stop to talk to the PR manager who tried to intercept us. He did not stop for the frantic journalist waving a microphone. He cut through the crowd with the efficiency of a shark moving through water. "It is going to be fine," he whispered in my ear, his hand gripping my upper arm like a vice. "I have a room set up. We have ice. We have everything you need. Just keep the mask on until we are inside." We burst through the double doors into the service hallway. The noise of the party was instantly cut in half. The air here was cooler, smelling of cleaning supplies and concrete. We were alone, save for a few staff members hurrying back and forth with trays. Seth did not slow down. He marched me down the long, carpeted corridor. "Room 814, he muttered. more to himself than to me. End of the hall. I stumbled slightly, letting my weight drag against him. Seth, please, I need a doctor. No doctors, he said sharply. Then his voice softened, a sugary coating over the steel. Not yet, baby. We do not want a scene. We do not want the press to see you like this. Think about your reputation. We will fix it ourselves first. Think about your reputation. It was the classic abuser's line. Isolate the victim to protect the abuser's image. We turned the corner toward the private elevator bank that serviced the diplomat's wing. There was a man standing near a stack of audio equipment cases, wearing a black technician's jumpsuit and a baseball cap pulled low. He was holding a clipboard, looking like he was checking inventory. As we passed him, he looked up, Walter Grady. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply met my eyes for a fraction of a second and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. The perimeter was secure. The exit was blocked. The journalist, Elena Vance, was in position. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear evaporated. I was no longer a wife being dragged by her husband. I was a trap closing around a rat. Seth did not notice Walter. He did not notice anything except the door to the elevator. He punched the button with his thumb, tapping his foot impatiently. Almost there, he said. Almost there. The elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside. Seth hit the button for the 8th floor. As the doors closed, sealing us in the metal box, the silence became absolute. Seth let go of my arm. He leaned back against the mirrored wall of the elevator and exhaled a long breath. He ran a hand through his hair, checking his reflection. He did not look at me. He looked at himself. He looked like a man who had just pulled off the greatest heist of his career. You did good, Chloe, he said, his voice dropping the performance of the concerned husband. You looked sufficiently tragic out there. The comments are going to be wild. I did not answer. I stood perfectly still, clutching my bag, listening to the hum of the elevator rising. Ding. The doors opened on the 8th floor. The hallway was empty, lined with thick, sound-dampening carpet and heavy oak doors. It was a place designed for secrets. Seth walked to the last door on the left, room 814. He pulled a keycard from his pocket. He already had it. He hadn't even checked in at the desk and swiped it. The light turned green. He pushed the door open and gestured for me to enter. After you, he said. I stepped into the room. It was a suite, luxurious and dimly lit. A bucket of ice sat on the table next to a large, industrial-looking first aid kit. The curtains were drawn tight. A large flat-screen television on the wall was playing the live stream of the ballroom downstairs. The sound muted. Seth followed me in. Click. The heavy door latched behind us. The lock engaged automatically. The noise of the world was gone. The investors, the cameras, the flashing lights, they were all on the other side of that door. Here, there was just me, Seth, and the lie he thought was truth. He turned to me, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. Okay, he said, leaning against the doorframe, blocking the exit. Let us see it. How bad is it? He wasn't asking with fear. He was asking with anticipation. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had promised to love and cherish. And then, slowly, deliberately, I reached up to the ear loops of my mask. You really want to know? I asked, my voice steady, no longer trembling. Stop being dramatic, Chloe, he said, checking his watch. Take it off. We need to take pictures before the swelling goes down. I pulled the mask away. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us inside. Room 814. The sound was final, like the closing of a vault. The silence that followed was instant and absolute, cutting off the murmur of the party and the flash of the cameras as if they had never existed. For exactly 3 seconds, Seth stood with his back to me. I watched the tension drain from his shoulders. He rolled his neck, cracking the vertebrae, and let out a long exhale. Then he turned around. The performance was over. The look of frantic, Husbandly concern that he had worn in the hallway vanished so quickly it was disorienting. His face smoothed out into a mask of cold, bored efficiency. He did not rush to me. He did not reach for the first aid kit. He did not ask me where it hurt. He walked past me, brushing my shoulder with a carelessness that made me flinch, and went straight to the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. He grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. "Look at that," he said, his voice devoid of empathy. "Trending #1 in under 4 minutes. The engagement metrics are vertical." On the screen, the live stream showed the ballroom we had just left. It was chaos. People were huddled in groups, typing on their phones. The comments section on the side of the screen was a blur of scrolling text. What happened to her face? Is it the product? Is she okay? Seth turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a manic kind of pride. "Did you hear them? Chloe, the silence when you walked in, that is what money sounds like. That is the sound of a market holding its breath." I stood by the door, clutching my bag, my hand pressed over the blue surgical mask. I needed him to say it. I needed the recorder taped to my chest to capture the confession clearly. "Seth," I whimpered, pitching my voice to be shaky and wet with tears. "It hurts. It feels like my skin is melting. Please. You said there was a neutralizer in the kit. Please help me." Seth laughed. It was a dry, short sound. He walked over to the minibar and opened a bottle of sparkling water. He took a long drink before looking at me. "Pain is a reaction. Chloe, it is just your nerves telling you something is changing. You need to ride it out. If we put anything on it now, it might stop the blistering process too early. We need the visuals to be visceral." I stared at him, widening my eyes. "You want it to blister, you want me to be hurt." "I want a story," he corrected. He leaned against the table, crossing his ankles. "Nobody buys perfection anymore. It is boring. It is unattainable. But a victim, a survivor. People open their wallets for a survivor. They want to buy the recovery. They want to feel like they are part of the healing journey." He gestured to the screen with the bottle. "Tomorrow, the stock will dip. That is the buy-in window. Then, we release the statement. A tragic, 1 in a million allergic reaction. A rare genetic sensitivity. We apologize. We recall the specific batch. And then we launch the Chloe Care line. Hypoallergenic, safe, tested by the woman who survived the fire. By next quarter, the stock will be triple what it is today." "You are using me," I said, stepping closer. "You poisoned me for a marketing campaign." "I am securing our future," he snapped, his voice rising. "Stop acting like a martyr. You benefit from this too. Do you think your little salary at Northbridge pays for this lifestyle? Do you think reading contracts pays for the trips to Cabo? I am building an empire, and you are just the cornerstone." I could lose my face. "Seth," I screamed, letting the hysteria bleed into my voice. "The doctor said it could be permanent." Seth's expression hardened. He set the water bottle down with a loud clack. "Good," he said. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. "What did you say?" I asked, trembling. "I said good," Seth repeated, walking toward me until he was looming over me. "Maybe if you have a reason to hide, you will stop trying to be so independent. You think I don't know? You think I don't see the way you look at my contracts, the way you scrutinize the joint accounts?" He sneered, reaching out to touch a strand of hair that had fallen across my forehead. I forced myself not to recoil. "You are always looking for an exit, Chloe. You always have one foot out the door. I have my own career. I have my own money. It is exhausting. I need a wife who needs me. I need a wife who cannot just walk away because she thinks she is smarter than I am." "So you decided to disfigure me?" I asked. "To make me stay. To make you grateful," he said. "When this is over, who is going to look at you? Who is going to hire you as a face of anything? You will be the poor, scarred Mrs. Horton, and I will be the saint who stood by her. I will be the only one who can stand to look at you. You won't go anywhere because you won't have anywhere to go." My heart was hammering against the recorder. A frantic drumbeat. He had admitted it. He had admitted the intent to harm, the motive of control, the psychological abuse, but I had one more nail to drive into the coffin. "I will sue you," I said softly. "I will go to the police. I will tell them you gave it to me." Seth threw his head back and laughed. It was a genuine, amused laugh, as if a child had just threatened him with a plastic sword. "Sue me with what lawyer and with what evidence?" He walked over to his briefcase, which was sitting on the bed. He popped the latches and pulled out a folder. He tossed it onto the table between us. "You signed the waiver, Chloe?" "I never signed anything," I said. "Technically, no," Seth smirked. "But legally, you did. And do you know how I know it will hold up in court? Because I used your own work to build it." He tapped the folder with his index finger. "I went into your laptop while you were sleeping. I accessed your files from Northbridge Risk Solutions. I read your case studies on liability avoidance. I read your notes on how to structure a watertight experimental consent form. I used the exact language you recommended in the Johnson versus Medical Tech case last year. And then I took your digital signature, the one you use for our tax returns, and I embedded it with a timestamp from a VPN that routes through your phone." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had violated my professional identity. He had weaponized my own competence against me. "You stole my work," I whispered. "I leveraged my resources," he corrected. "You taught me how to beat you. Chloe, you wrote the instruction manual on how to destroy yourself. So go ahead. Call the police. Show them your face. I will show them the document where you agreed to the risks of high-potency experimental compounds. I will show them the clause where you waived all rights to litigation in exchange for equity in the project. You are not a victim. Darling, you are a silent partner." He checked his watch again. "Now, stop stalling. The swelling should be peaking. I need photos for the before file of the recovery timeline. Take off the mask." It was time. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slept beside me for 7 years. The man who had just confessed to dismantling my life with the precision of a sociopath. I felt the fear evaporate, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like ice water in my veins. "You really want to see it?" I asked. "I need to see it," he commanded. "Take it off, now." I reached up slowly. My hands were steady. I hooked my fingers around the ear loops of the blue mask. I pulled it away. Seth stared. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as he took in the ruin of my face. Megan was a genius. The lower half of my face was a landscape of horror. The latex skin was peeled back in ragged strips, revealing angry, glistening red flesh underneath. Yellowish blisters clustered around the corners of my mouth. A streak of dark, artificial blood had trickled down my chin and dried there. It looked raw. It looked infected. It looked like agony. "Oh," Seth breathed. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of horror. It was a smile of satisfaction. It was the smile of an artist looking at a finished masterpiece. "It is visceral," he whispered. "It is perfect. My God. Chloe, the sympathy vote is going to be astronomical." He reached for his phone, bringing up the camera. "Hold still. Look sad. Look broken. Don't look at the lens." He raised the phone, framing the shot. "This is it," he muttered. "This is the money shot." I watched him. I watched him prepare to capture my destruction for his portfolio. "Seth," I said, my voice dropping the trembling act. It was clear. It was strong. It was my own voice. "Don't talk," he snapped. "You are ruining the framing." "You forgot one variable," I said. He lowered the phone slightly, frowning. "What?" "You checked my work files," I said. "You checked the waivers, you checked the liability clauses, but you didn't check the date of the signature." "What are you talking about?" he asked, annoyed. "October 14th, I said. "I was in surgery that day. I was under anesthesia for 6 hours. I couldn't have signed a digital waiver from my phone." Seth froze. His eyes flicked to the side, processing the information. A glitch, he dismissed. We will say it was a time zone error. And you forgot something else, I said. I reached into my bag. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a packet of wet wipes. Seth watched me, confused. What are you doing? Don't touch it. You will infect it. I pulled out a cool, damp cloth. I unfolded it. You forgot that I am not just your wife, I said. I am a risk assessor. And the first rule of risk assessment is to verify the data. I pressed the wet wipe to my cheek. Seth gasped. Stop! What are you doing? I wiped. I dragged the cloth firmly across my chin. The latex caught and tore. The red grease paint smeared. I wiped again. Harder this time. The blisters peeled away. The raw flesh dissolved into a streak of red dye on the white cloth. Underneath, my skin was pale, smooth, and completely intact. Seth dropped his phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. He stared at my chin. He stared at the healthy, unblemished skin that was emerging from beneath the makeup. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a computer that had just encountered a fatal error. It is fake, he stammered. But the lipstick, I checked your pocket. You had it. I had it, I said, scrubbing the last of the glue from my lip. But I didn't use it. I tested it. On a handkerchief. On a flower. I saw what it did. Seth, I saw it burn through silk in 4 minutes. I tossed the dirty, makeup-stained wipe onto the table in front of him. It landed next to his water bottle, a wet, crumpled ball of red and beige. You. Seth backed away, his face draining of color. The arrogance was gone. Panic was rushing in to fill the void. You set me up. I gave you exactly what you wanted, I said, stepping toward him. You wanted a show. You wanted a performance. This is entrapment, he hissed, his eyes darting around the room. You recorded me. Is that it? You are wearing a wire. It doesn't matter. It is inadmissible. I will say I was role-playing. I will say I was trying to calm you down. Oh, I am recording, I said, tapping the device on my chest. But that is just for the lawyers. Seth looked at the door. He was calculating his escape. He was thinking he could grab the folder. Grab me. Maybe threaten me into silence. You can't prove anything, he said, his voice rising in pitch. It is your word against mine. Nobody heard us. We are in a soundproof room. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had smiled all night. Room 814, I said. The diplomat's wing. Private. Secure. Exactly, Seth said. Nobody knows what happened in here. Seth, I said gently. Look at the TV. He frowned, turning his head slowly to look at the large flat screen mounted on the wall. The screen was still showing the ballroom. The guests were still standing around, looking confused. But then, the image on the screen changed. The main feed from the ballroom cut away. It was replaced by a new camera angle. It was a grainy, high-angle shot. It showed a hotel room. It showed a man in a tuxedo standing next to a table with an ice bucket. It showed a woman in a black dress wiping makeup off her face. Seth squinted. He blinked. Then he saw himself on the screen. He saw himself looking at the screen. The image on the TV went into an infinite mirror effect. The Seth on the TV was looking at a TV that showed Seth looking at a TV. He spun around, scanning the room frantically. His eyes locked onto the smoke detector in the corner of the ceiling. There was a tiny red light blinking inside it that hadn't been there before. You see, I said, my voice calm and deadly. I didn't just ask Walter to block the hallway. I asked him to patch a feed. He has a friend in the AV booth downstairs. When you turned on the TV to check your engagement metrics, you didn't realize that the input was set to internal broadcast. Seth looked back at the screen. On the ticker at the bottom, the comments were no longer asking about my face. OMG, did you hear that he confessed? He said he poisoned her. Is this real? He wanted to sell the comeback story. Monster. You wanted a live stream. Seth, I said, you wanted everyone to look at you. You wanted to be the center of attention. I pointed to the screen, where the image of his terrified, pale face was being broadcast to the 200 people in the ballroom downstairs, and likely, by now, to thousands more on the internet. "Say hello to your audience," I whispered. They heard every word. Seth Horton fell to his knees. The heavy oak door to room 814 did not just open, it exploded inward. The magnetic lock gave way with a screech of tearing metal that sounded like a gunshot, and the sanctuary of silence Seth had built for himself was instantly violated by the roar of the outside world. It happened in a blur of motion that felt both incredibly fast and agonizingly slow. The first people through the door were not the police. They were the hotel security team, led by a shift manager whose face was pale with the realization that his establishment had just become the stage for a felony broadcast to millions. Behind them, pushing through the gap with the force of a tidal wave, was the media. Flashbulbs detonated in the small room, blinding and relentless. The strobe effect made the scene look like a stop-motion horror film. Seth was still on his knees, his hands hovering in the air, his face a rictus of shock. I stood over him, the wet wipe still clutched in my hand, my face clean and pale and terrifyingly calm. Elena Vance, the investigative reporter I had contacted, was the first civilian to breach the perimeter. She did not have a microphone. She had a phone, and she was streaming. She looked at me, then at Seth, and gave a grim nod. She had gotten everything, every word of his arrogance, every syllable of his confession. Every frame of his terrifying rationalization had been beamed directly to the massive screens in the ballroom downstairs. "Cut the feed!" Seth screamed, scrambling to his feet. He lunged toward the television on the wall, as if smashing the screen would somehow delete the internet. "It is a skit. It is a performance piece. Turn it off. It is too late. Mr. Horton," a deep voice cut through the panic. David Ross, my attorney, stepped into the room. He looked out of place in the chaos of the hotel suite, wearing a trench coat over his suit, looking like he had just walked out of a noir film. He held up his phone. "We have 3 million concurrent viewers," David said, his voice level and cold. "And they all just heard you admit to conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, fraud, and coercion." "She entrapped me," Seth shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She set this up. Look at her face. It is fine. She is lying." "My face is fine because I was smart enough not to trust you," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the sudden hush of the room, it carried. But the intent was real, the chemistry was real, and the confession was real. Seth looked around the room, searching for an ally. He looked at the hotel manager. He looked at the security guards. He looked for anyone who saw him as the golden boy, the visionary, the CEO. But nobody was looking at him with admiration anymore. They were looking at him with the morbid curiosity one reserves for a car crash. "Get me my lawyer," Seth snarled, trying to regain his composure, trying to pull the shreds of his dignity back around him like a torn cloak. "This is a misunderstanding. I was testing her loyalty. It was a psychological stress test for the brand ambassadors. It is standard industry practice." "There is nothing standard about chemical burns, Seth," another voice spoke from the doorway. Walter Grady stepped into the room. He was no longer wearing the generic hotel technician jumpsuit. He had put his security cap back on, the brim pulled low, but his head was high. In his hands, he held a thick bound logbook and a stack of shipping manifests. Seth froze. He recognized Walter. He recognized the man he had ignored in the hallway, the man he had ignored in the parking lot, the man he had treated as invisible furniture for years. "You," Seth whispered, "you are the night watchman." "I am the archivist," Walter corrected. He walked past the security guards who made no move to stop him. He placed the stack of papers on the table next to the ice bucket. "This is the shipping manifest from the warehouse," Walter said, addressing the room, addressing the camera Elena Vance was holding. "Dated 3 days ago. Package ID matching the one delivered to the Horton residence. Contents listed as industrial solvent type 4, hazard class corrosive, destination Seth Horton, Personal attention. Walter opened the logbook to a marked page. And here, he pointed to a handwritten entry, is the log of the night the prototype was created. Unauthorized entry to the mixing lab by Seth Horton at 2 a.m. No chemists present, just him. And a container of alkaline stripper. Seth's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. The paper trail was the one thing he respected. And now it was strangling him. You stole company property, Seth hissed. That is theft. That is inadmissible. It is whistleblower evidence, David Ross interjected. And we have already submitted digital copies to the district attorney's office. David stepped forward and handed me a tablet. The email just came through from Dr. Mercer, he said. I looked at the screen. The official toxicology report was a wall of text, but the conclusion was highlighted in red. Sample contains high concentrations of sodium hydroxide and lidocaine. Application to human tissue would result in third-degree chemical burns within 5 minutes. Permanent scarring inevitable. Classified as a biological weapon in this concentration. I turned the tablet around so Seth could see it. Doctor, Mercer says hello, I said. He also says that if I had used this, I would have lost 40% of the skin on my lower face. Seth stared at the report. He backed away until his legs hit the edge of the bed. He sat down hard, the mattress springs groaning under him. The fight was draining out of him. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches after burning the house down. Then, the sirens started. They were not distant. They were right outside the hotel. A wailing cacophony that cut through the rain and the noise of the city. Blue and red lights flashed against the drawn curtains, pulsing in time with the pounding of my heart. The hotel security manager touched his earpiece. He listened for a moment, then looked at Seth, with a mixture of disgust and professional detachment. Police are in the elevator, he announced. They are coming up. For a domestic dispute, Seth laughed weakly. I will be out on bail in an hour. My lawyers will crush this. You have no physical evidence of harm, no victim, just a recording and some stolen papers. You are right, I said. I am not a victim. I looked toward the door. The crowd in the hallway had grown. The guests from the ballroom had swarmed up the stairs and the elevators, driven by a primal need to see the conclusion of the drama they had watched on the screens. They were pressed against the security line, a sea of sequins and tuxedos and shocked faces, but the crowd parted. A woman stepped forward. She was wearing a high-collared dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. She was trembling. I recognized her from the vague description Walter had given me. But more than that, I recognized the way she held herself. She held herself like someone who was used to hiding. She walked into the room. The silence that fell was heavy and suffocating. She looked at Seth. Seth looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in his eyes. He knew her. Hello, Seth, she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but it carried a weight that cracked the air. She reached up and unbuttoned the high collar of her dress. She took off her hat. A collective gasp went through the room. Even the hardened security guards looked away. The left side of her neck and jaw was a map of shiny, keloid scars. The skin was pulled tight, distorted, the texture of melted wax. It was a brutal, undeniable record of agony. My name is Jessica Cole, she said, turning to Elena Vance's camera. 2 years ago, I was an influencer with 2 million followers. Seth Horton hired me for a private test. He told me I was special. He told me I was going to be the face of the future. She pointed to her scars. This is what his future looks like. Seth began to shake. You signed? He stammered. You signed the NDA. You took the money. You can't be here. You will lose everything. I don't care about the money anymore, Jessica said, tears sliding down her unscarred cheek. I saw the live stream. I saw what you tried to do to her. I realized you didn't stop with me. You were never going to stop. She looked at me. Our eyes met. There was no need for words. We were sisters in a sorority we never asked to join. bound by the cruelty of the same man. "The NDA is void," David Ross said, stepping next to Jessica. "It is void because it was signed to cover up a crime, and with Mr. Horton's confession on tape regarding his intent to harm my client, we have probable cause to reopen your case as a criminal investigation. Ms. Cole?" The elevator doors down the hall dinged. Heavy boots pounded on the carpet. Police, 4 officers in uniform, led by a detective in a cheap suit, pushed through the crowd. They entered the room, their hands on their belts, their eyes scanning the scene. "Seth Horton?" the detective asked. Seth did not stand up. He couldn't. "Stand up," the detective ordered. He pulled Seth up by his arm. "You are under arrest for attempted aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." Seth looked at me as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound was metallic and final. "Chloe," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Chloe, tell them we can work this out. Think about the company. Think about our assets. If I go to jail, it all goes to zero. You will have nothing." I walked up to him. I stood toe-to-toe with the man who had bought me flowers 2 days ago to mask the scent of poison. "I don't want your assets, Seth," I said. "I have my job, I have my name, and I have the truth." I leaned in close, whispering so only he could hear, echoing the old man at the bus station. "And you are wrong. I won't have nothing. I will have the story. And this time, I am the one writing the ending." The police dragged him out. The cameras flashed. The crowd in the hallway booed a low, angry sound that followed him into the elevator. I walked to the window and looked down. The rain had stopped. Below, on the wet pavement of the hotel driveway, I saw the flashing lights of the police cruisers reflecting off the puddles. I saw the investors streaming out of the lobby, getting into their town cars, making frantic calls to sell their stock before the market opened. The empire of Seth Horton was collapsing in real time. The PR team had cut the live stream 10 minutes ago, but it didn't matter. The internet is forever. The clip of his confession was already trending globally. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Megan. She had pushed her way in with the police. She hugged me, crying, her makeup smeared. "You did it," she sobbed. "You actually did it." I hugged her back. But my eyes were fixed on the corner of the room. Walter Grady was standing there, packing his papers back into his bag. He looked tired. He looked old. But he looked lighter, as if the ghosts that haunted him had finally been exorcised. He caught my eye. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, and turned to leave. I watched him go, and a cold thought snaked through the warmth of my victory. The plan had been perfect. The execution had been flawless. But there was one variable that still didn't fit the equation. Walter had told me he worked at the warehouse. He told me he saw the manifest. He told me he knew Seth's schedule, but he had met me at the bus station. He had been there before I arrived. He knew my bus was delayed. He knew exactly which terminal I would be standing in. He knew exactly when I would be vulnerable. Seth hadn't told anyone I was taking the bus. I had booked the ticket on my private credit card because the flights were grounded. I hadn't even told Seth the specific time until I was already at the station. How did Walter know where to find me? He said he was a security guard. He said he was a watcher. But a warehouse guard doesn't have access to my personal travel itinerary. A warehouse guard doesn't have the resources to intercept a target in a city of 3 million people with that kind of precision. I watched the empty doorway where Walter had just vanished. Seth was a monster. Yes, but someone else had pointed the weapon at him. Someone else had given Walter the intel, the timing, and the push to intervene. I had won the war against my husband. But as I stood in the ruins of the VIP suite, I realized I had no idea who the general was on my side of the battlefield, and that terrified me more than the lipstick ever could. The trial of the state of Ohio versus Seth Horton did not begin with a bang. It began with the slow, grinding friction of the American legal system rubbing up against a man who believed he was too expensive to be incarcerated. It took 6 months for us to get to the courtroom. 6 months of motions, 6 months of discovery, and 6 months of Seth living under house arrest in the penthouse we used to share, wearing an ankle monitor that he probably told his friends was a fitness tracker. The media called it the lipstick trial. It was a grotesque name, reductive and catchy. Exactly the kind of branding Seth would have appreciated if he wasn't the defendant. The courthouse in downtown Cleveland was besieged. Satellite trucks lined Lakeside Avenue like a mechanical army. Every morning when I walked up the stone steps, surrounded by David Ross and a phalanx of private security, the flashbulbs went off in a blinding rhythm. They wanted to see the face that hadn't melted. They wanted to see the woman who had wiped away a tragedy with a wet wipe. Seth had hired a defense team that cost more than the gross domestic product of a small island nation. They were sharp, aggressive men in three-piece suits who specialized in reasonable doubt. Their strategy was simple and vicious. They argued that the chemical composition was a manufacturing error, a rogue batch from a supplier in China. They argued that the waiver, the one with the forged digital signature, was legitimate, claiming I had authorized it verbally and the digital stamp was just a formality. They painted me not as a victim, but as a disgruntled wife who had staged a dramatic scene in a hotel room to extort a divorce settlement. But they had a problem. They had the recording. The prosecution played the audio from the hotel room on the third day. The courtroom was silent, packed with jurors, journalists, and the ghosts of the women Seth had silenced before me. Jessica Cole sat in the front row, her scars visible, a living testament to the pattern. When the jury heard Seth's voice, cool, arrogant, admitting that he wanted a visceral reaction, admitting he checked my pockets, the air in the room changed. It shifted from curiosity to disgust. You can spin a lot of things, but you cannot spin the sound of a man laughing at his wife's pain. However, the defense had one final card to play. They couldn't attack the recording, so they attacked the timeline. They attacked the credibility of the investigation. They went after Walter Grady. Walter took the stand on the 5th day. He looked uncomfortable in a suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent his life in the background. Now forced into the glare of the fluorescent lights, Seth's lead attorney, a man named Sterling who had a reputation for destroying witnesses, approached the stand like a shark circling a swimmer. "Mr. Grady," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "You claim you intervened because you suspected foul play. You claim you met Mrs. Allen at the bus station to warn her." "That is correct," Walter said. His voice was steady, that familiar rasp echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "But Mrs. Allen testified that she did not tell anyone she was taking the bus." Sterling continued, pacing in front of the jury box. "She booked the ticket privately. Her husband thought she was flying. The flights were canceled due to weather. It was a last-minute decision." Sterling stopped and leaned on the railing of the witness stand. "So, Mr. Grady, if nobody knew she was at the bus station, how did you know exactly where to find her? Were you stalking her? Were you following her? Or is it possible that you and Mrs. Allen conspired together to stage this encounter?" The courtroom murmured. It was a good question. It was the question that had haunted me since the night at the hotel. How did he know Walter looked at Seth? Seth was sitting at the defense table, looking smug. He thought he had him. He thought he had found the loose thread that would unravel the whole tapestry. "I did not stalk her," Walter said. "Then explain to the jury," Sterling demanded, "how a warehouse security guard knew the precise travel itinerary of a woman he had never met, when even her own husband did not know she was there." Walter took a breath. He adjusted the microphone. "Because Seth Horton bragged about it," Walter said. Sterling froze. "Objection. Hearsay." "Overruled," the judge said. "The witness will answer." Walter turned his eyes to the jury. "Seth Horton treats the people who work for him like furniture," Walter said. "He talks in front of us because he does not think we are listening. 2 days before the launch, I was in the security office at the logistics center. Seth came in with the vice president of operations. He was showing off the Project Chloe file. Walter pointed a finger at Seth. He pulled up a document on his tablet. He was laughing about how perfectly he had trapped her. He said, "I even have her tracked down to the minute." He showed the VP a copy of her electronic ticket. He said he had installed a keylogger on her phone months ago. He knew she bought a bus ticket the second the transaction went through. He knew the bus number. He knew the departure time. He told the VP, "She is taking the Greyhound like a peasant because she is desperate to get home to me. She has the lipstick in her pocket, and she is bringing it right to the slaughter." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. "I saw the ticket on the screen," Walter continued. "I saw the time, 3:45 p.m., Cleveland Interstate Terminal. I didn't need to stalk her. Seth gave me the map. He was so proud of his control that he gave away the only chance to save her." Seth's face crumbled. The smugness vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He had destroyed himself. His own arrogance, his need to show off his dominance, was the reason Walter had been there. "I went to the station," Walter said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "because I knew if I didn't, she would be the next Jessica Cole. I risked my job. I risked my pension. I risked going to jail for breaking a non-disclosure agreement, but I looked at that ticket, and I decided that $4 for a stranger was a better price to pay than watching another woman burn." The jury did not need to hear anything else. The deliberation took 4 hours. In a case this complex, 4 hours is nothing. It is a stampede. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, I did not look at Seth. I looked at the seal of the state of Ohio on the wall behind the judge. Guilty, on count 1, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Guilty, on count 2, conspiracy to commit fraud. Guilty, on count 3, reckless endangerment. Guilty, on count 4, tampering with evidence. Guilty. The list went on. It was a litany of his sins, read out in a monotone voice that sounded like a choir of angels to me. The judge sentenced him 3 weeks later. She was a woman in her 60s who had seen enough domestic violence cases to know a predator when she saw one. She gave him 25 years. No possibility of parole for 15. But the real sentence wasn't the prison time. It was the liquidation. The civil suits from the investors and the class action lawsuit from the other victims, the ones Walter's files had helped identify, stripped him of everything. The penthouse, the cars, the stock options, the brand. It was all sold off for parts. Seth Horton didn't just go to prison. He went to prison as a pauper, after the trial. I left Cleveland. I could not stay in a city that felt like a crime scene. I sold the apartment. I kept my job at Northbridge Risk Solutions, but I transferred to their Chicago office. I needed a skyline that I didn't recognize. I needed rain that didn't remind me of a bus station. I did one last thing before I left. I met Walter Grady at a diner near the interstate. He was no longer wearing a uniform. He was wearing a fishing vest and a hat that said, "Retired." I slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check for $200,000. It was a significant portion of the settlement I had received from the hotel's insurance company for the security breach. Walter looked at it and shook his head. "I didn't do it for money, Chloe." "I know," I said. "That is why you have to take it. If you had done it for money, you would have sold the story to the tabloids. You gave me my life back. Walter, this isn't payment. It is a refund on the years you lost working for a monster. Go fishing. Go somewhere warm." He looked at the check, then at me. His eyes were still sharp, but they weren't afraid anymore. He took the envelope. "You be careful out there, Mrs. Allen," he said. "It is just Ms. Allen now." I smiled. "And I am always careful. I checked the fine print." Life in Chicago was good. It was quiet. I worked hard. I dated tentatively. I rebuilt the trust in my own instincts that Seth had tried to dismantle. I thought it was over. I thought the book was closed. But narcissists do not let go. They leave claw marks on the inside of the door even as they are being dragged away. 6 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived at my office. It had no return address. but the postmark was from the correctional facility in Grafton. I knew who it was from before I opened it. My hands didn't shake this time. I used a letter opener. I sliced the envelope with the precision of a surgeon. Inside, there was a single sheet of yellow legal paper. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, stripped of the elegant calligraphy he used to use for birthday cards. There was no greeting, just 2 sentences. You wiped off the makeup. Chloe. But you can never wipe off the truth that for 7 years, you looked at a monster and called him home. I stood by the window of my office, looking out at the gray waters of Lake Michigan. The words were meant to hurt. They were meant to plant a final seed of doubt, to make me question my own judgment, to make me feel stupid for loving him. He wanted me to feel like a fool. He wanted me to believe that because I had been tricked, I was flawed. I folded the paper. I did not tear it up. I did not burn it. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of my office. I fed the sheet into the machine. I watched it turn into confetti. He was wrong. I hadn't looked at a monster and called him home. I had looked at a mask, and the moment the mask slipped, the moment the data didn't add up, I didn't look away. I didn't make excuses. I didn't stay. I took him down. I sat back at my desk and looked at the reflection in my computer monitor. My face was clear. My skin was intact. My eyes were bright. I looked directly into the black lens of the webcam. Breaking the fourth wall of my own life, I smiled. It wasn't a survivor's smile. It was a victor's smile. "Nice try, Seth," I whispered to the empty room. "But I don't use your brand anymore." Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey into the darkest corners of trust and the brightest lights of justice. I want to know where you are listening from. Are you in a rainy bus station, a quiet office, or the safety of your own home? Comment down below with your location and your thoughts on Chloe's revenge. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales where the truth cuts sharper than a knife, please subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel. Don't forget to like this video and smash that hype button so we can share these stories with more people who need to know that sometimes. The best revenge is simply surviving and telling the truth. Stay safe, check your pockets, and I will see you in the next story.